And you've just heard Song from the Last Page of News of the Dead, which is taken from the excellent album Songs from the Last Page by Gareth Williams. And I'm delighted to be joined by Gareth now. Hello, Gareth.
Hello, Alistair.
So first of all, tell us about Songs from the Last Page, because it's a really interesting project.
Well, thanks for having me on to talk about it, first and foremost. It's a nice project to talk about because it is, I'd say, a quintessential concept album. So I'll walk you back a couple of years ago. Lockdown, I think it started, where I normally would work with scripts and libretti and words that get sent to me. I would tend to work at the piano and turn those into songs. And during lockdown, shows were cancelled. Everything was off. So there was a chance for me. I wanted to keep writing, but I needed words to do that. That's my craft. I respond to words. So I started to pluck books from my shelves at home, and I would turn to the last page, I guess arbitrarily to begin with, and I would try and take a chunk of the words from at some point to the last full stop and turn that into a song. And from there, I got one, I got two. It started to move from hobby to obsession. And I ended up with a collection, I think, of maybe 40 songs from the last page. Now, there are a huge variety from all over the place. It was classics, modern, even from some plays and some theatre things and things. So there was a big mix, but there was an opportunity that came just out of lockdown. It was the year of stories in Scotland. So I put together a little proposal, and off I went around the book festivals and the libraries of Scotland, all over the place. And I would sort of add to the collection as I went. And I started to kind of curate and collect a little Scottish collection of songs from the last page.
And how did you... Sorry, I was just going to ask how you picked the books, because when I first heard about this project, before I'd even listened to anything, I thought, one, it's such a brilliant idea, and it's almost the perfect project for me. It's music and it's books, and it's Scottish books at that. And then I saw the books itself, and I went, I've read all of these apart from the Sherlock Holmes and the Callum McKinnon piece. I've read all the books. What are the chances of that as well? So how did you pick the books? How did you decide what ones you were going to use?
I mean, Alistair, I did hope people like you existed. I mean, so you are, it does sound like you're the target audience for this. And I think it was easy once I had written quite a few, it was easy to start to hone in a collection and then start to see what was missing. And I did want to tell a story. It's a strange way to tell it, but you can tell a story of Scottish literature across the last pages and songs from the last pages of a particular group of books. Now, there was some classics in there immediately. There's some Robert Louis Stevenson. There's some J.M. Barrie. I consider Lanark a classic now as well. And so I was locking those in. But quickly, you start to notice that you are looking through one lens, and books that are out of copyright. They're usually by men. They're usually from a while ago, and it was like that ceased to work after a while as a lens, as a device, and it started to become necessary to look for other storytellers and to look for other lenses and different age and contemporary stories from different points of view. And then slowly it started to look like a collection that was worthy of saying this represents Scottish literature. And I know there's lots I've missed, but let's call this one volume 1, and we can start adding volume 2 soon.
I was going to ask you that if there was a volume 2. I would say, having worked a little bit in academia, this would almost make a perfect curriculum for a Scottish literature programme, going right back to Stevenson and Peter Pan and there's the Gaelic track, and you've got very contemporary writers as well. So you have done that, it is a fantastic snapshot. Did that mean that there were, you said you'd maybe written about 40, and that included stuff that wasn't Scottish? That was right across the board, yeah.
Yeah, some things had to go. We were in the studio and we had a little bit of time left, and we were going to have a crack at recording Sunset Song, which has the most beautiful last line
Yeah.
But we just ran out of time. So that's back on the board for the next round. But yeah, there was a lot of things I had to let go of. I think I cut my teeth early in this project by hitting the classics. So I was trying this concept out with Great Expectations, with Frankenstein, with The Great Gatsby. Do you know? So those sort of rather seminal texts. But the book that started it all for me, the concept came from Andrew Gregg's At the Lock of the Green Corrie, which is, I mean, that is a knockout, sort of quiet knockout of a book, isn't it? And it's a beautiful, wistful book about friendship. But he does something on that last page, which now looking back was the concept, and he says something along the lines of, "It's time to dismantle the fishing rod. It's time to close the book. It's time to live your life and to move on." And the last line is about stepping off the page and out into the world. And that's it. I thought there was something dreamy in that last line, that if I sat at a piano, I could get this text off the page and out into the world somehow.
That's really interesting, because I mean, Andrew as well has been a terrific writer, is a good musician as well. So that connection has kind of adds something to it too.
He was really, really generous. I wrote to him and I said, "Andrew, I want to turn the last line of your story into a song," and he didn't ask why or anything. Like, he was just like, "Of course, yeah, give it a go." He had that. He's a writer, but he did have that musician's point of view too, and he was really generous and curious and really supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Right. If people, that's the other thing, it works really well as an introduction, maybe to writers that people haven't heard. You know, they might come in for the Stevenson and Alistair Gray and the names that they know, but then there's other people that they might discover along the way, and maybe Andrew's one of those.
I think so. I think Scotland loves a best kept secret, and it's got so many in the world of literature and music, doesn't it? Like, and so it's great to discover these books. I discovered them too, and with the help of some of the book festivals of Scotland, they were saying, "Oh, we've got this writer coming in, have a read of this," and I found the James Robertson book. I found just by when I was up at Bookmark Festival in Blairgowrie, and they were talking about this book, so I read it. And that's the one we just heard there. And that book, I felt like it made the whole collection make sense. And it made the conceit become more than just a little concept and become something quite elegiac and something quite loaded or something. It started to mean more than just an idea. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And it makes sense as well that it's James Robertson, because I think out of all the authors, he's the one that almost captures Scotland as a whole, or at least attempts to write about Scotland as a whole. He's done it in the past, and News of the Dead does that over time more than maybe place, but it does absolutely that. Yeah,
it is. It's anchored to place, but it's the time, it's the scope, and it's such an epic story, and then it's haunted and it has ghosts, and it's so that there's lots in that I was able to, that really helped me find the song in the book on the page. But the other thing I had to be clear at the start that yes, this has to work for readers, but it also has to work for non-readers too, or as you said, people who haven't discovered these books yet. My ambition would be that people leave a concert and go and buy these books.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are no spoilers. There are no spoilers in the ones I've chosen. There were a couple of books where I did look at the last line and I thought I better not. That does feel like some people would be genuinely annoyed if I gave away a massive ending. But for these ones, there's something slightly more abstract in the last couple of lines and a bit more dreamy that I thought it was okay.
I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. There'd be certain, particularly maybe crime novels, that you gave away the
Yeah, the Butler did it. Is a terrible way to spoil a book. But I did have the Sherlock Holmes in there.
Of course.
And it was suggested to me, and it was the first Sherlock Holmes book I ever read, actually, and I really loved it. It's really wonderful stuff. The pacing of it, the ticking along of it is so I suppose it's because it was serialized and all the rest, but it really, it's one of those books back to sitting up late to finish the chapter kind of vibe about it. It really brought me back to being a voracious reader as a teenager. But there was no obvious song at the end of it, and some of them had an obvious song, I felt, and others it took me a little bit of time to get to the bottom of.
And there are a few kind of outliers, as I think you described them in the book. You've got the Ali Smith, How to Be Both. Now, why is that different for people who haven't read it?
That's a wonderful book as well. I mean, I think there's something about the last page of the last page of the Ali Smith. It feels like quite a folksy, quite earthy text, but actually it is such a high concept and you know, really challenging book. I found to read. I was absolutely in love with it, but it ends twice, that book.
Yeah.
It's a sort of, it's two characters across time, again, across quite the space of time, and yeah, you can choose the order you read that book, and so I just ultimately had to go with the order I read it. So it's my last page of the Ali Smith.
And what other kind of outliers would you say that are different from the normal books that are on there?
Well, I got to have a lovely guest spot.
Yeah.
Slap bang in the middle of the record, and that's Deirdre Graham, who I invited to write a song in sort of response, and I was working with Chamber Music Scotland, a really lovely organisation at the time, and they commissioned these songs, and commissioned one from Deirdre, and Deirdre responded. She's a Gaelic singer and songwriter by choosing a really beautiful text that please don't make me try to pronounce. My Gaelic is shocking. I mean, I do get to sing a little bit of backing vocals, but Deirdre, she coached me very carefully to get that right. And that's a very beautiful book, but that's from a single page of a collection of writings in Gaelic that Deirdre discovered, and it's a really beautiful song. And then the only other outlier in an album of outliers is the song from near the last page of Peter Pan.
Yeah.
And it's a single line. I think it might be 6-7 pages from the very end.
Right.
That just captivated me. I thought it was a really beautiful knockout of a line, and it's not the end, but it feels like the writing is on the wall when you hear this line, with the relationship of Wendy and Peter just put away in a box.
Yeah.
Essentially. It's
and
very sad.
You mentioned Deirdre. We should talk about who else is on the album, because it's not just yourself.
Deirdre has that beautiful guest spot halfway through, but my band, as it were, it's Ashley O'Day on violin and Justina Jablonska on cello, and so that was the little touring show. It was myself at piano singing with the girls on stringed instruments, and it was a really lovely little band to tour, and a great way to build these songs. So they are quite lean. You know, it is a very quite straightforward, clean little palette. So we have, my favorite group of instruments to write for is piano. I like the attack of the piano, but then the sustain of strings underneath.
Right.
You get a nice sort of bed. You get some water to swim in as a singer. So I just fell in love with singing with strings underneath me, and that became just the sound of this album. And when we went into the studio, I wanted to try and capture that, but geez, I did find it hard to suddenly not have a drum kit and a bass. I think in the album, I found it. We had to come up with a few little novel ways sometimes to generate a little bit of rhythm and texture and things like that. It was quite tricky to sustain that for the 11 songs, but I think we got there.
And I saw you playing live at the Edinburgh this year, and it's a great, for one thing, it's not just the songs, it's the stories as well that you tell around each one. So it kind of worked perfectly as a single piece of theatre, for musical theatre in that way. And you say you worked on this and grew it through touring. Was that the case? Did you have just shorter things to begin with, and then it developed through time?
Yeah, I started off at the start of 2022, which was the year stories, and I think I had a core group of songs, maybe 9-10 songs, maybe 12 songs actually I had all together, because there was a couple that weren't Scottish, and off I went, and then I started to add to that, and I would add something in Wigtown Book Festival, I would add something for Aberdeen, and so forth, and put it like that. And so that's how it grew. But yeah, the storytelling side of it became equal weighted, I think, in the live shows, because and also that's something, I'm asking some advice at the minute because the album is there, and I do think that side of the project has to somehow go and exist with it online. So I am thinking right now about how I finally leave that album for people to discover. At the minute, it's being discovered by people who know the project, and that helps. But ultimately, you have to find a way into to every concept album. But I would tell a story. Sometimes it started off, I bet you the first couple of gigs sounded like I was just doing a book review, and then giving 5 stars and singing the last page. But ultimately, I realized that there's the story inside the book, but there's the story of the book and who gave it to you, where you got it, where you finished reading it, who you gave it to next. And those stories I thought were actually becoming quite meaningful, especially with the little bit of poignancy and melancholy of focusing on the end.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely a sort of idea grew, and I can see why those comedians go and they do their 27 nights at the Fringe, because you do actually finally work out what your show is when you do a Fringe run. And I think by the last night I was walking out on stage going, this is the show. This is what it's all about. It's not just about endings and it's also about our relationships with stories and which ones we keep and what we add of ourselves into them and things like that too. So I thought I could just be quite honest with the audience and share my connections with some of these books, and try to tie that into a little bit of a tale.
And among the kind of names that perhaps people know better, there's 2 books that kind of jumped out at me, or 2 writers that did, and that was Eli Percy's Duck Feet and Ross Sayers' Sonny and Me, 2 books I absolutely love. Why did you choose those as the kind of contemporary and maybe new writers that are included? Although Ross has been writing for a while, to be honest, and so has Eli, to be honest. But yeah,
they're just sort of becoming. I think they're both wonderful writers. The funny thing about Duck Feet had sort of, by the time the Fringe show had come around, it had almost vanished. You could not get a copy of that book. And then suddenly it's appeared on Kindle, and there's a second edition coming out now soon. So I'm really happy to see that book back out in the world again, because it's just a wonderful voice, isn't it? It's a wonderful character's voice, and the language is exquisite. It's sort of written in a Renfrew Paisley dialect, which I, confess I have murdered on stage on a few occasions when I read from that book. But it feels authentic. I wanted to see high school stories.
Yeah,
I think a Scottish high school is where you get, a real concentration of stories, and high school is where some stories happen there that define you for the rest of your life, and so it is an important part of the stories we tell and the stories we keep. I was in Paisley Book Festival to start this show, and I had questionnaires out, and someone said in the questionnaires that you should perhaps read happier books. Because a lot of the first night, a lot of the endings were very, very tragic, like Sunset Song, and they are very sad books. And so Duck Feet was the antidote to that problem, and from the streets of Paisley came the answer, because it's joyous, it really jumps off. I mean, you have your share of sorrows and you care about these characters, but they're heading off out into the world at the end of that book in a way that I think Eli captures really, really well. And then you mentioned Ross Sayers, and this was completely coincidental that I found this song, but I can remember so vividly. I tell this story on stage, but I know exactly where I was the day I saw Sonny and Me on the shelf, and it was exactly, now I'll tell you to the day, it was 2 years and 10 months ago, because it was just a few weeks after the birth of my wee boy, who's called Sonny.
Right.
And as I've said to the audience, I think there's a period of time when you've just become a parent or dad that you're out in the world just thinking the whole universe wants to talk to you about your son, about your new child. And so I was in that cloud of thinking about my little Sonny, and I looked over and I saw Sonny and Me on the shelf, and I thought, yes, that's the one for me. The universe wants me to is giving me this book. So I took it home and read it, and it's so fabulous.
Yeah.
And it showed me, it gave me this window into seeing that high schools haven't changed a lot, but also have changed quite a bit too. It really felt I was a really illuminating little way of looking into a high school. And of course, there's a fun caper, and there's a whodunit, and there's something to be solved. But on the last page, the two characters are just walking to the corner shop to get a slushie. And the two characters are called Sonny and Daughter, and they have this beautiful relationship between the two of them. But also, by mentioning my own little boy called Sonny, my relationship is stitched into that song too. And it's a good illustration of what I mean about how the books we read become part of the stories of us as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it's about friendship. You know, you were talking about Andrew Gregg's book, and it's a beautiful book about friendship from that time, which, as you say, sometimes shapes you for the rest of your life. And I have to say, it's been such a pleasure discovering these songs and listening to them again. We'll hear Sonny and Me, the song from the last page, Sonny and Me, in a moment. You mentioned a volume 2. Do you think that will happen? Or are you still concentrating on this as volume 1 and getting this into as many hands as possible?
I'm in a funny place right now, because I normally I'm just a songwriter or a theatre maker or an opera maker. I make shows and they're finished and they go off in the post.
Yeah.
And then other people make it happen, and I'm involved. You know, it's more of a collaborative process. And this was the first time I stayed with the songs myself and toured it and got to the bottom of it and recorded it. And it feels strange to me to have stayed with material like this for such a long time. And I found it quite illuminating, but also scary. And, you know, like writing songs is scary, but performing them is a new thing again. And then sort of recording them and all the rest. So it's been really weird for me to stay with the project this long, but I'm sort of in love with it now. But I do now have to put it down for a few months. I'm making a show for Dundee Rep Theatre at the minute. That's the script on the piano right there. And I have other projects. I'm going over to Toronto next month. One of my operas is on over there called Rockin' Horse Winter. And so I'm going to have to just set this down for a little while and do these other projects. But I think I have this practice, this hobby, I suppose, that I can come back to now, and I can open a book and I can sit down and I can start to make a song on the last page. And as I said, I do have surplus materials. I have so many of these songs. I wonder now if there's a chance to take it internationally. I'm very much out into that, the share that, sort of take that Scottish literature journey out and tell other people about it. So I have been thinking about some other book festivals over the seas that I might like to do next year, and to do this again. I'd love another volume. I might be tempted to look at an Irish volume.
Sure.
You know, so there are ways to go at the minute. I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break and just you know, do some work, but I'm going to come back to this again and again. I think this will be a thing I return to quite a lot.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I actually agree with you. I think in terms of, you know, I speak to a lot of people who go to book fairs around the world, and they've got their Scottish literature stand and they're, you know, spreading the word the best they can. But something like this album, I've got the CD copy here. What a great way to do just that, to introduce people to writers from across the board, new writers. Yeah, I think it's been a huge success, and I really do hope you do more. I understand if, you know, other things get in the way, but if you do, hopefully we can get you back on and chat more about it, because I could talk to you for much longer, Gareth. Unfortunately, time is against us, but all the very best, and thanks again for having a chat.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And this is Gareth Williams and song from the last page of Sonny and Me.